I never should have gotten on that train. I keep telling myself that. I replay the whole night in my head, over and over, wondering if there was a way to avoid it. But I didn't know. How could I have known? It was just supposed to be a regular train ride, something I'd done 100 times before. But that night was different. It all started with a late-night study session at the library. Finals were coming up, and I was buried in books, trying to cram as much information into my head as possible. I lost track of time, as usual, and by the time I packed up my stuff and headed out, it was almost midnight. The streets were empty, just a few distant headlights here and there. The only thing on my mind was getting home and collapsing into bed. The campus was a good distance from my apartment, but the midnight train usually ran late enough to get me there. I'd taken it plenty of times before, and it was always the same. Quiet, empty cars, maybe a few late-night travelers catching some sleep. I liked the emptiness. It was a chance to unwind after a long day. That night, though, something felt off. I didn't notice it at first. I was too tired, too zoned out to pay much attention. But when I stepped onto the platform, the air felt different. Heavy, almost. Like something was pressing down on my chest. I shook it off, blaming it on exhaustion, and waited for the train to arrive. It pulled in right on time, the headlights cutting through the darkness like they always did. The doors slid open with that familiar hiss, and I stepped inside. Empty. I'm not talking about the usual quiet, half-empty kind of ride I was used to. I mean, completely empty. Not a single person in sight. Just rows of seats stretching out in front of me, bathed in dim, flickering light. For a second, I thought I'd gotten on the wrong train or something. Maybe it was out of service. But the doors closed behind me, and the train started moving. I shrugged it off. Weird, sure, but nothing to freak out about. I'd been on quiet trains before. It was late, after all. I figured I'd grab a seat, maybe close my eyes for a bit, and be home in no time. I picked a spot near the back, the furthest from the doors. I always liked to sit where I could see the whole car. I don't know why, it just made me feel more comfortable. I pulled out my phone, checked the time, 0:15 a.m. Nothing unusual there. Then, as we rolled through the first station, I noticed them. At first, I thought the car was still empty. But as we passed under the lights of the platform, I caught a glimpse of a few people sitting in the seats ahead of me. They must have been there the whole time, I just hadn't seen them. Their heads were slumped forward, eyes closed, like they were sleeping. I felt a little better. At least I wasn't completely alone. The train rattled on, the rhythm of the wheels on the tracks almost hypnotic. I leaned back, letting my head rest against the window, and before long, my eyes started to get heavy. I figured I'd close them for just a minute, take a quick nap before my stop. But as I started to drift off, something made me snap awake. The train had stopped. I sat up straight, blinking in confusion. We weren't at a station. There were no platform lights, no signs, no buildings. Just nothing. I looked out the window, but all I could see was darkness, thick and impenetrable. Like we were in the middle of a forest, or worse, nowhere at all. I glanced around, expecting to see some movement from the other passengers. Maybe someone would know what was going on. But when I looked up, my heart froze. They were all awake. Every single one of them. The ones who'd been slumped over in their seats before, eyes closed, were now sitting up, staring directly at me. Their eyes, God, their eyes. They weren't right. They were hollow, empty. Like there was nothing behind them. No life, no soul. Just darkness. I felt my skin crawl. I looked away, trying to calm myself down. Maybe they were just as confused as I was. Maybe they were wondering why the train had stopped too. But the longer I sat there, the worse the feeling got. The air in the car felt heavy, suffocating. I could hear the faint sound of breathing, but it wasn't normal breathing. It was shallow, raspy, like they were all struggling for air. I tried to stand up, to move to the front of the car, maybe find the conductor and ask what the hell was going on. But as soon as I got to my feet, the intercom crackled to life. "We've reached the final stop," the conductor's voice said, calm and flat. "All passengers must exit the train." Final stop? That didn't make any sense. There was no final stop on this line. I knew the route by heart. There was no way we'd already passed my stop, and there definitely wasn't any stop in the middle of nowhere. I looked out the window again, hoping to see something, anything, that would explain where we were. But the darkness pressed against the glass like a thick fog. No lights. No buildings. No sign of civilization. My heart was racing now. The other passengers hadn't moved. They were still sitting there, staring at me with those empty eyes, their mouths slightly open, like they were waiting for something. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Where are we?" I asked, my voice shaky. No one answered. They just kept staring. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and started walking toward the front of the car. I had to get out of there. I had to find out what was going on. As I passed the rows of seats, I could feel their eyes following me. I didn't want to look at them, didn't want to see those hollow stares, but I couldn't help it. Every now and then, I'd glance to the side, and there they'd be, watching, waiting. The intercom crackled again. "All passengers must exit the train." I reached the door at the front of the car and pressed the button to open it. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, and I stepped out into the night. The cold hit me first, sharp and biting. I looked around, but there was nothing. No station. No platform. Just an endless stretch of empty tracks disappearing into the darkness. Behind me, the train sat still and silent, its lights flickering weakly. I turned around, my heart pounding in my chest. The other passengers were still inside, still sitting in their seats, still watching me. "All passengers must exit the train," the conductor's voice repeated, more insistent this time. I didn't move. I couldn't. My legs felt like they were made of lead. I didn't want to go back inside, but I didn't want to stay out there either. It felt wrong, all of it. The air, the silence, the darkness, it was all wrong. I looked down the length of the train, hoping to see the conductor, or someone, anyone, who could explain what was happening. But the train was empty. No one was coming. I was alone. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the distance, just beyond the last car, there was movement. A figure, barely visible in the shadows, walking toward the train. Slowly. Deliberately. I blinked, thinking my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, it was real. The figure was getting closer, moving in and out of the faint light cast by the flickering train windows. I backed up, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure stepped into the light, and I could finally see it. It was the conductor. But he didn't look right. His face was pale, too pale, like it had been drained of all color. His eyes, just like the passengers, were hollow, empty. He smiled at me, but there was no warmth in it. Just hunger. "We've reached the final stop," he said, his voice low and cold. "It's time to get off the train." I stumbled back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. What is this? Where are we?" The conductor didn't answer. He just kept smiling, his eyes locked on mine, that cold, dead smile stretching wider and wider. I turned and ran. I don't know where I thought I was going. There was nowhere to go, just endless tracks stretching into the darkness. But I couldn't stay there. I couldn't face whatever the hell that thing was. My feet pounded against the gravel as I ran, my breath burning in my lungs. Behind me, I could hear the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, following me. The conductor wasn't running, but he didn't need to. He knew I had nowhere to go. The air grew colder, sharper, and the darkness seemed to close in around me, suffocating me. I looked over my shoulder, but I couldn't see him anymore. I couldn't see anything. That's when I heard it. Whispers. Faint, distant, but growing louder with every step. They were coming from the tracks, from the ground beneath my feet, from the air itself. Words I couldn't understand, but I knew they were meant for me. I stopped running, my chest heaving, my legs trembling. The whispers surrounded me, filling my head, drowning out everything else. And then, suddenly, they stopped. I stood there, frozen, listening to the silence. The train was gone. The tracks were gone. Everything was gone. I was alone. I don't know how long I stood there, staring into the void, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it all. But eventually, I turned around. The conductor was standing right in front of me, his empty eyes locked on mine. "It's time to get off the train," he whispered. I don't remember what happened after that. All I know is that when I woke up, I was back in my bed, my clothes damp with sweat, my heart still racing. The sun was shining through the window, and everything seemed normal. But it wasn't. I know it wasn't. I checked the train schedules that morning, trying to find the midnight train I'd taken the night before. But there was no record of it. No midnight train. No final stop. It doesn't make sense, I know. But it happened. I was there. I saw them. I saw him. And now, every night, I hear the sound of the train in the distance. I hear the whistle, the rumble of the tracks. I don't go near the station anymore. I don't take late-night trains. But sometimes, late at night, I catch a glimpse of the headlights in the distance, cutting through the darkness. And I hear the conductor's voice, soft and cold, whispering from the shadows. "We've reached the final stop."